volunteers, and many more partners. And they are doing really important work to maintain and restore parklands and urban forests to create a sustainable network throughout Seattle and keep our city green. Next slide. All right, so who are the youth ambassadors? So these workshops were created and are being led by students like many of you. And so the GSP Youth Ambassadors are a group of high school students who are passionate about environmental issues and restoration and preservation of our forests and green spaces. And so by leading these workshops, we hope to inspire all of you to be good stewards and advocates for the environment and the planet and its people. And we hope that you share this knowledge you learned today to educate those around you so they can do the same.
Okay, so now we're going to do a quick introduction of all of us. Just a heads up, you can tell who the youth ambassadors are because it says YA right before our name, but we're going to do quick introductions right now. So Meredith, go ahead.
Hi, my name's Meredith. I'm a senior at Seattle Prep. I use she, her pronouns, and my favorite plant, I don't know if I have a specific one, but I just really love all house plants at the moment.
Hi, my name's Sydney. I use she, her pronouns. I'm currently a senior at Seattle Academy, and I would have to say my favorite plant is ocean spray.
Hi, I'm Margot. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a senior at Ingram. And my favorite plant is probably a deer fern.
Hi, I'm Ava. I'm a senior at Seattle Prep. I use she, her pronouns, and I think that even though it's a weed, I think stinging nettles are really fun because you can eat them.
Hi, I'm Maya. I'm also a senior at Seattle Prep, and I use she, her pronouns. And this is my favorite plant, but I don't know what it's called, but it sits on my desk, so I like it a lot.
Hi, I'm Danielle. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a senior at Ingram High School. And my favorite type of plant is basically any type of fern.
Okay, so now we're gonna get to know you guys a little bit. So you can either text the code that you see on the screen to 22333, or you can click on the link that was just sent in the chat, and you're gonna also answer the same question we just answered, which is what is your favorite plant? So go ahead and click on that link and fill out the survey.
These are all really good plants. Excellent work.
This is looking great, guys. I love seeing all the different favorite plants. We have a lot of variety. And flowers and trees. Bushes. I thought bushes was interesting. I like that. I have lots of plants in my room. Well, not lots, but I have 3, but I don't know the names of any of them. So extra points to people who can actually name plants. I think that's awesome. Okay, so thank you guys for sharing your favorite plant with all of us, and we're going to move on to some content review.
All right, next slide. So for the carbon sequestration review, we're going to start with the greenhouse effect. So gases in the greenhouse effect is when gases in the atmosphere are trapped due to heat from the sun. And then if you look at the little illustration on the right, it just kind of shows that. That's mainly methane and CO2, what we'll be talking about. And basically the more greenhouse gases that are trapped, the more heat that results. This increases the Earth's temperature. The use of fossil fuels also rapidly increases the Earth's temperature. And Earth's climate has fluctuated throughout the past. We're experiencing right now are unprecedented. So some effects, Earth's temperature increase, oceanic changes, including the melting of the ice sheets, along with extra water that is held in those melting regions is causing the sea level to rise and disturb those who live on the coast, resulting in coastline communities being threatened by that sea level rise and being at very high risk, along with weather changes. That can be seen in the more extreme weather we've been seeing this summer, like the California forest fires, along with the increase of storms on the East Coast. And these changes in weather, smoke, and smog majorly impact low-income communities, showing how environmental racism intersects with the climate. And much of the smog impacting low-income communities and at-risk communities is human-made. That's generally from large extractive industries, just also showing that environmental racism aspect. But we'll also talk today. So carbon is a basic building block of biomolecules, and it is omnipresent. It's a heat-trapping gas produced both in nature and by human activities. So the burning of coal or oil for energy, human activities, or in forest fires, or the decomposition of organic matter, which would be natural activities. Next slide. So then we'll talk about carbon sinks. So carbon sinks are natural or artificial deposits that reduce carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Oceans are considered the main natural carbon sinks, and we'll mostly talk about those today. They can absorb 50% of the carbon emitted in the atmosphere. Plankton, coral, fish, algae, and bacteria help with this process. Carbon sequestration is also done in forests through photosynthesis, and they return oxygen as output. And we discussed this in the soil workshop about a month ago, if you were at that one as well. But there are some manual ways to sequester carbon, but these man-made and machine focused sinks have problems and sometimes cause carbon leaks. And then you can see in the diagram on the right that it just kind of shows the 3 different ways. 45% of carbon dioxide stays in the atmosphere, while the rest is sequestered naturally by the environment. Next slide, please. All right, so now we'll be talking about carbon in the ocean. So seaweed can be used to counter climate change, mainly through blue carbon, which is carbon captured by the world's ocean and coastal ecosystems. So kelp and other macroalgae are highly efficient at storing carbon. They draw more carbon from the atmosphere than land-based rainforests do, which I thought was pretty interesting. They combat ocean acidification and deoxygenation that oceanic carbon sinks can produce. They can also be processed into biofuel, and if added to livestock feed, reduce methane emissions from cows and livestock by as much as 70%. So then marine permaculture arrays are floating open ocean kelp ecosystems placed in oceanic deserts and can help sequester carbon and attract and grow fish. And then there's a diagram on the right. Next slide.
So now we're going to be heading into small breakout rooms to discuss the learning content and the things that Ava just reviewed. And in those groups, make sure to assign someone to share the highlights, because when we come back in our big group, we'll need someone from your group to share out what you guys discussed. Right, hello everyone, welcome back. So now that we're all in our big group again, would someone from each group like to share out the highlights of what you discussed? So maybe just unmute, and if you know you're that person, and just share out.
I can go. I think I was in group 1. I don't remember. But we talked a lot about the power of people, and well, it's really important to hold big corporations accountable for their actions, not just through voting, but protesting and boycotting. And if you have the resources to make those changes in your life, like eating less meat, then try and do those. But it's also understandable if you're not able to.
I can go. In our group, we talked about a lot about holding corporations like responsible, and how like through what we buy and yeah, basically what we buy, we can hold them accountable and like basically make them emit less carbon. Because like that fact, I forget who put it in the chat, about how a few hundred or a couple hundred companies emit like most of the carbon in the world. I think that's really important. And then we also talked about how we can't rely too much on carbon sequestration, or however you say that, because eventually it'll get like overloaded. And if we're focusing on how the earth can absorb some of it, we're not really focusing on how we still need to make a big change and cut down on carbon emissions.
In our group, we had a lot of those sentiments as well. And also someone mentioned that one thing that we as individuals can do to fight for climate justice is to elect officials and vote in our elections to make sure that our like political leaders are advocating for climate rights.
Is that all of the groups? With only 3? Okay. Well, those are all really good points. And it's interesting to see that even in different groups, we kind of touched on and arrived at similar conclusions. I just wanted to like specify in on like a couple of the questions that we talked about. So anyone can share out at this point, but what do you guys think are the reasons why like urban forests are so important to carbon sequestration?
If I may, that the urban areas. Wait, urban is cities, right? I always get it mixed up. Yes, sorry. Urban areas is where you're seeing most of the pollution. So, like cleaning up and sequestering as much carbon as you can, and the hot spots is really important.
Our group also talked about that, and how urban forests and parks and gardens and stuff can filter out carbon, but also how it connects to like what we talked about at the last workshop, the water workshop, and how it kind of has a double benefit of how you can filter stormwater and also like sequester CO2 at the same time.
And we talked about how in those like since there's so few green spaces in these urban areas, we really need to like be taking care of them and like removing invasive species so those native ones can thrive.
We also brought up how invasive species, although some of them are, yes, quite a bit invasive, some of them are also helpful, and because they can trap the carbon in the soil. So you kind of need a balance between the two. But in general, the invasive species kind of tend to take over some, but it's good to keep some.
Are there any last points? Alrighty. Another thing is like in your groups, you guys might have thought of any questions that you might want to ask someone who's more knowledgeable on this topic or an activist. And so on October 24th, we're going to have a panel of experts and scientists, and they can answer like any questions that you guys have about the material that you've learned over the past couple workshops or things that you've thought of in these discussions. And so does anyone want to share out some of their questions that we can take note of to ask later at the panel? That's totally fine if you guys don't, but we hope to see you at the panel, and I'm gonna hand it over to the next person. Meredith, are you here?
Sorry, I just got kicked out. So I'm back now. Okay, so before we start to wrap up the end of this workshop, we just want to cover a little bit about what you can do to help this issue. So we will be sending out a follow-up email after the workshop, which will contain links and articles. So you can just learn a little bit more about how to be sustainable. And as you'll see some of these on the screen, they'll include how to like calculate your carbon footprint and then things you can do to reduce your carbon footprint, some links on just how to learn more about carbon sequestration. And then there's also going to be this link for you can join a movement to divest from fossil fuels, which will be super cool. So that will all be in the upcoming email. Next slide. Okay, and then our next and our final workshop is going to be on October 24th. It's going to be from 11 a.m. until 12 p.m., just like today. And this is our panelist workshop. So we're going to have a panel of experts and environmental scientists to basically answer any of your questions. So like we already kind of mentioned, feel free to type questions you have in the chat right now, but there will also be a place where you can type them in the registration form. Which will be linked in the email that we send out, and it's also going to be on Green Seattle Partnership's Instagram, so you should be able to find the link. Next slide. And we need your feedback. So in that email, we're also going to be sending out a short survey, which shouldn't take any longer than 5 minutes. And that's just so we can continue to make these workshops better and more inclusive. And so we thank you in advance for your help making these workshops better and better every time. And also feel free to check out the recordings from our previous workshops because they're going to be posted on Green Seattle's website. So if you missed any of our previous workshops and you want to watch them, they will be there for viewing. Okay, and with that brings us to the end of this workshop. Thank you guys so much for coming, and we hope to see you all on the 24th.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good one.